Good evening and a warm welcome back to the plenary session this evening. We now have the much anticipated fireside chat with Professor K. Vijay Raghavan about the emerging role of science and technology in India's growth. This conversation will be moderated by Mr. Rishabh Gulati, who is a television journalist and currently the managing editor of the national news channel NewsX, where he also serves as the principal prime time news anchor. He is the executive director of Global Youth, an organization that mentors young people, especially young women, in taking leadership roles and engaging with foreign strategic, economic, and social policy initiatives. He is also an alumnus of the Australia-India Youth Dialogue and the Asian Forum on Global Governance. Over to you, Mr. Gulati. Could I please request you to introduce Professor Vijay Raghavan and begin the fireside, please? Over to you.
Nabina ji, and to your entire team at the Nudge and all the large organizations that are supporting this fantastic 3-day charcha. Thanks very much for giving me the privilege to speak to an eminent person like Professor Vijay Raghavan. And you picked a topic that I know is really close to his heart, and he's bringing the academic and scientific capacity, and I bring in the curiosity and hopefully a chance for a TV journalist to keep silent for a change and listen. For those of you watching this on the Nudge live streaming platforms on AirMeet, and the rest of you watching live right now on NewsX, as you probably well know, Professor Vijay Raghavan is the principal scientific advisor to the government of India. He is the man who is helping bring some practical action on what science and technology has to offer us and how do we convert that into socioeconomic growth. In his background, which is multifarious, he by profession is a developmental geneticist and of course has been the former director of the National Center of Biological Sciences. His fields of specialization are biology, genetics, and neurogenetics. He helped set up the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bengaluru. That comes under the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, TIFR. That was in 1992. He's also served as director of the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bengaluru and the secretary of Department of Biotech. Welcome, Professor. What a treat this is. Now, I mentioned this is a subject close to your heart. For those of us watching this on various platforms, Professor Vijay Raghavan, has been the front line at a time when we are realizing the value of the medical sciences, of engineering, of rapid prototyping, of achieving things. There was a time in India when we were building the best planned cities and discovering zero and looking out into space. But there was also a time in India when the same best planned cities were being used as ballast for the Kabul-Multan railway. And when an individual who wanted to set up a steel foundry in India was told that if the Indians could make steel, they would eat it. He did set up the largest steel foundry in Asia and then set up a town called Jamshedpur. Science and technology is crucial. Professor Vijay Raghavan, where are the areas, sir, that we should be focusing on in terms of industry, in terms of academia, in terms of our entire Team India approach when it comes to science and tech?
Thank you very much, Rishabh. It's a great pleasure to be here. And, this is really very, very interesting, but also strange times in terms of what science and technology can do. And the reason I say this is since the time when humans domesticated plants and animals, they were practicing science in multiple ways. That got formalized on scale at the start of the Industrial Revolution pretty much. And that resulted in the growth through multiple industrial revolutions of the world we see today. There are many exciting and positive things which have happened, and many things which have happened which need not or should not have happened and should have been avoided. It's really economics and politics which drives change in the world, and science and technology is the fulcrum on which social and economic change rests on. So it's a combination, this interaction which is there. Your question was, what can we do today in terms of science and technology in the country to change? Now, the answer would have been different if we had asked this 50 years ago, and the answer would have been different if we had asked this 2 years ago. 50 years ago, it was more about manufacturing, setting up capacity, having a combination of self-reliance and global connect. Then the digital world came about us, and that really has changed dramatically the way the economy drives. It's both e-commerce, the link between Internet of Things, all of that is important. And with the pandemic, we have completely broken global supply chains. New world orders are still likely to emerge, and we are going to have to reinvent many, many, many things. And that requires us to use all our learning to advantage to shape our lives and livelihood from water supply, agriculture, health, and so on. So and these are doable because of the investment we've done in science and technology. So we've got new kinds of routes open now.
Professor, obviously, you've been seeing the past 18 months from a very, very micro and macro perspective. There were, I remember sitting, when we were still trying to figure out how we will make a test kit, how we will figure out how to make masks and sanitizers and PPE kits. 18 months, rapid R&D, prototyping and manufacturing at large scale. What are the lessons we've learned, sir?
The lessons we have learned comes from what society demands of industry and what industry demands of academia. These are three different trains which move at different speeds. Society and politics want solutions by the weekend. Industry wants solutions by the quarter. And science and technology deliver solutions by the years or decades. How does one have what is called in electrical engineering an impedance matching so that information and material can go between these three speeds? That is what we learned in the last 18 months. That there are many, many treasures in our science investment portfolio which we can rapidly move to industry, which we can rapidly move to application. So that's really something remarkable. We must continue to invest in basic science because that pays off in areas we don't know where the challenges will be, but we must continue to rapidly move to industry and to society.
There's a fascinating new trend happening, and I've been covering it as a journalist, like I said, out of passion and curiosity. For those of you watching, in the middle of the pandemic, we've come up with the draft space policy. InSpace is already working with 28 private sector players. Hopefully by, very soon we'll have a private sector rocket launch. The defense industry is ramping up. We're hosting a summit on hydrogen very, very shortly, and that's going to be very fascinating. So when it comes to industry, these industrial partnerships, Professor Vijay Raghavan, how do we encourage them? Where do you see the opportunity there?
What has happened with the space policy is a remarkable example, and that will actually start being implemented in other sectors. With space, we had till recently a structure where public funding went into pretty much every space launch. And then the satellites were used in the public sector dominantly. There were many, many private satellites launched, but they were not large in number or quality compared to what was launched globally. In space now is a new structure which will receive proposals for satellite launching, both from government and the private sector and from startups, and tell ISRO in an independent manner, these are the ones you should be launching, these are commercial, these are societal, and so on. So this really transforms ISRO into an R&D core and in space as a structure which decides on merit and on demand what needs to be launched. This is going to completely transform the space entrepreneurship and satellite launching sector. But that's not just that. If you look at the geospatial policy, that is completely opened up now, and that allows mapping and geospatial data, remote sensing data to be converted into value-added supplies which can be used across industry. That opens up a huge range. And that's not just that. You have the draft drone policy which is up and will be put out very soon, and that allows again collection of data in a huge way. So this is going to be really impactful on the health, agriculture, mining, environment, and commerce sector.
Okay, since you covered space, where are the replications? Because the defense is going the same way. But if you look beyond that, in biotech, in silicon, as setting a silicon manufactory over here in India has become a huge deal. In artificial intelligence, what do we do? Do we approach it strategically, or do we just let some impetus for industry happen?
There's always the balance between ambition and what we can do, and balancing that with the reality of what the world around us is. It's, of course, very important that we should be adventurous and do multiple go into multiple areas. And I'll come to that. But it's also true that the rest of the world is not sitting idle. They're also trying to do innovative things. And, there's not just catching up, but there's strategic catching up to be done. So coming back to what we can do, very simply, what's happened both by design and by accident, Indians are at the core in industries such as the semiconductor industry, but also in manufacturing all over the world, contributing at a design edge. So, and design is becoming key in manufacturing everywhere. In other words, there are companies whose core focus is design and who have a distributed manufacturing system. Manufacturing is not unimportant by any means. Quality manufacturing is important, but you get manufacturing done from different companies. You design the composite, you design the whole network. That's what India is now embarking on in a big way, and that's India's strategic advantage.
Okay, the strategic advantage is that we have the one biggest asset to be Atmanirbhar on is brain power is here. Then it comes to design, and then it comes to prototyping, and then of course to implementation. But if you just pick some specific areas, sir, and you mentioned space. Now, space is not just about rockets. Okay, it's about what happens when ISRO gets the satellite imagery. Who's going to apply the AI algorithm that's going to tell you which area is growing which crop, and which area is being more urbanized. So if there are young entrepreneurs out there, young people in college, and they're doing, listen, we're getting these troves of data which ISRO is now opening up. What are the areas that people should be looking at startups in utilizing this data?
There are simply stated two ways to do this. You can have solutions in search of problems and problems in search of solutions. So both of them are needed. And the solutions in search of problems is not a small thing. You can have extraordinary new technologies which come from the aggregation of multiple available technologies. So it's not just pie in the sky long-term research, and that can result in solutions to really complex problems, and they cut across multiple problems. Very simply, one category of such problems is the ability to sense the environment. So sensors are important. Analyze the aggregated data and feed back into decision making. What the kind of sensor is can vary, and that's the problem in search of a solution. If you're a farmer, it's soil quality. If you are interested in water supply, or in the demand end or the supply end, you could be in water supply companies or cities. And therefore, this is a very big opportunity. Till recently, these kinds of solutions were available through big, huge multinational companies. Today, there's a great opportunity for small companies to get these solutions and scale. One example of that, and it's not trivial, it's huge amount of technology investment over the years. One example recently is Tejas, a small company in Bangalore, is now partnering with Tata's in semiconductor technology in telecom. Absolutely stunning. I think they'll be world beaters with a combination of deep tech and marketing ability. And there are many, many such examples you're going to see.
So, those are hopefully big check marks on making indigenous 5G, even if all the R&D has not been done here. But 6G can be, and getting that, 6-7 nanometers silicon lab is going to be very, very important. It can be done. Professor, you've been all over the world and had tenures both in academia and otherwise. At the very university level, how do we convert R&D happening there to prototyping, practical purpose, and having lots of companies to push this emerging out of our university setup?
This requires a combination of both tech capability and regulatory push. Let me give you an example. In terms of 5G, our scientists have worked not only to develop technologies for use of 5G in rural areas, but they've also worked with global regulatory bodies to make sure that they are accepted as standards. Once you accept something as a regulatory standard, then its market booms enormously. And that's what our scientists are learning in every sector. It's not just the product, whether it's old tech or old science being used in new ways or new science coming in. You have to ally to make sure it goes through the regulatory pipeline. Some of our scientists have got together and put in place 5GI, which stands on the global 5G regulation, but adds on I for India or innovation and new ways. So we're going to see new ways by which a combination of tech science and regulatory changes can put in place Indian science and technology into the national and global marketplace.
Professor, do we need economies of scale examples like what we did with LED bulbs, for example? What we're doing with solar right now, not just the solar mission, but what India is per se doing. Do we need particular examples to showcase to industry what can be done, or should it be more organic?
No, this is very interesting question in the time of global supply chain shakiness. The key to all the questions which you asked this time are the availability of energy, right? Now, how do you get solar energy to scale? Of course, you can put up solar panels and get solar energy, but where do the panels come from? How are they assembled? Where do the photovoltaic cells come from? So those back end have huge costs both in imports and on global environment. So we need to keep exploring energy sources which are both economically viable and not subject to market fluctuations. Those who supply you solar cells and panels and wafers and all of that, a slight tweak in the price can send your internal system into a complex phase, just like changes in oil price can. So it's very important that we are energy self-sufficient, not just in the use of renewable energy sources or nuclear or whatever, but also in their development over here. And that's happening.
Okay, and for people watching this broadcast, we are now actively looking for lithium. We already know that we can maybe do something with our thorium reserves, of which India has one of the largest in the world. So there are lots of potentials out there. So let me pick on one. One is big data. Professor Vijay Raghavan, we're being told that this is the fifth industrial revolution, and it's going to be data based, and AI is going to feed off that data and become smarter and smarter. There are patents being filed in this field by Indian researchers and companies, but not at the scale that the Americans and the Chinese are doing. What is your best hope there? What emerges in this field for us?
The Niti Aayog put out a national AI policy a couple of years ago. That's been translated into an AI mission, and that will be launched very, very soon. So that's the government lever, as it were, to the overall ecosystem. But well before that, the Department of Science and Technology has put in place a huge cyber physical system mission to allow the Internet of Things and such like activities scale, and that's going full pelt, just as a supercomputing mission is going on. So you're seeing, again, a very large broadening of the footprint of research and application work in these areas, and therefore you're going to see more and more of what I referred to earlier as solutions in search of a problem. Now, the solutions are enabled to access the problems because there's been separately a big push in the government to open up data use through data policy changes and bringing tech into ministries. So that's at the government end, but also at private sector, NASSCOM and other agencies have been pushing this in a big way. So I think all the building blocks are in place. We've gone through a phase of a early and late lag phase, and we're ready for exponential takeoff in this sector. And this will be distinctly different from AI use all over the world, because the Indian mantra is AI for society, right? And not just for industrial growth. So it's going to impact on agriculture, health, education, and energy on scale. And the training sets are going to be substantially Indian, and therefore its legitimate value in our ecosystem will also be much more.
Okay, and there's a time coming where data is no longer going to be measured in terabytes. I'm told at scale you have to measure it in megawatts, because that's how much power it uses. But can you give us help us give us an example when we say this social AI or open AI from data sets? What are we looking at? I mean, how do we translate that into something? Is it going to then be an app for farmers, a satellite-based solution, a water management solution? Where do you see this going?
See, there are two different aspects here. There are, of course, lots of apps available for farmers, for engineers, for health workers, and so on. But they're not necessarily AI-driven. If you want to look at an AI-driven app which everyone uses, it's the map we use when we go from place A to place B, or order something, and then an AI engine suggests more products and so on. So that's at the consumer level. Now, at the level of the, at health or agriculture, we need similar ease of using AI The apps, of course, are meaningful, but the backends really have to analyze the data really well. That is not yet taken off on that scale. So let's take health, for example. We now have extraordinary changes in health which have taken place. The National Digital Health Mission has taken off. All your health data is portable. You can put it through, no matter how rich or poor you are, you can store your health data in one location. So if you've done a set of tests in one location, you can access it in another location. You have e-pharmacy, you have, distance consultation, all of that possible. Now, where does AI come into this? AI comes into this when all the X-rays which are there all over the country, all the MRIs, they are anonymized, they are available for analysis, and therefore diagnostics becomes easier and easier for the doctor, and they can go to higher and higher levels of analysis rather than relatively routine stuff. Now, India has one ability, its one demonstrated ability is to put IT on scale, and India is not scared of doing that. And India doesn't have to learn from others. Others have to see Indian examples in the scaling aspect. There are many things we learn from each other, but scaling is something which Indian IT is really good at. So to AI for society, you're going to see our use of, in health, for example, our health data being anonymized and being valuable for us to get, as an individual, better service.
Okay, anonymized. And of course, the logic is that AI should be able to see your scan and give aid and suggestions to human doctors to help analyze it better. All of this has to be built in an architecture, Professor Raghavan, and in everything that we are sitting from, the microphone in front of me and the mobile phone and the laptop is eventually silicon based. How crucial is this going to be, having this ability not to assemble in India, but to make it in India?
There are two different aspects here. One is about functionality right away, next week, next month, few months from now. There, the overall network architecture is key. The design architecture of the systems are key. And there is the ability to assemble components which are got from elsewhere into the design in a manner where you're company agnostic and you can move components from one company or the other. In other words, the short term allows you to do the most complex in a manner where it's your design and your platform and you're agnostic to the source and you have only trusted sources. So this allows you to have security as well as high quality going forward in the next 1-2 years. Now, manufacturing is another big game. And we can go into that a little later, but that's very different.
So let me pick on this because we only got a few minutes left. Manufacturing, now that I don't think government is planning to go into mass scale manufacturing. We're not, 30, 40 years ago. So it's about industry partnerships. Now, how are we, there was a PPP model, which we've done in roadways, which is a different kind of, of infrastructural construction. When we're talking about high-tech manufacturing, is there a PPP model? Is there a government becomes a contractor model? Is it a tender model? Is it a competitive model? Where do you think we're going?
So the government in many sectors has encouraged deep tech manufacturing by having production-linked incentives of various kinds. So you come in and invest in battery storage, for example, electric cars, you get production-linked incentives. Now, that will scale up to some extent. A substantial requirement, though, is ecosystem development, testing facilities, ancillary facilities, use in other sectors. As that grows, and that grows initially through imports, that will also build up an ecosystem where manufacturing can come for chips, for example, in a big way. It will start with scaling up at the lower end of the chips, and that's fine for about 50, 60, 70% of what one needs in the IoT world.
Correct.
And then the higher end will happen. It has to be successful only if it can link immensely to the export market, and that's a big challenge.
Yeah, we are making progress in the general chips, which don't have to come down to 7 nanometers, which you can use for most of the activities, which are cheap chips. We're making progress there, and setups are already happening. Okay, so I have to ask you before we close this, AI specifically in your domain expertise and what you've been tracking in vaccine development and others. We saw the Koreans, apply AI to come up with alternatives. So in the medical field, other than just being predictive and doing data analysis, predictive AI actually coming up with models of vaccination. Do you see a huge future here, especially given the circumstances?
Yes, with a certain level of caution. In biology, if you use AI and modeling methods, you can go from tens of millions of possible solutions to thousands of possible solutions, or even hundreds of possible solutions. But since it's biology, these hundreds and thousands have to be tested out. So testing out on scale at the level of cells in the lab, model organisms, other animals, and in humans is also feasible. And this combination can greatly speed up the development of drugs and vaccines. I've lost your audio, Rishabh.
Yeah. So before I let you go, sir, the objective of this forum and the reason we are taking part of this telecast opportunities also is to come up with some kind of workable suggestions. So what would you suggest to both the participants here, the other speakers who are about to follow you, and we're getting people from NASCOM and from the DRDO right after this with my colleague, and to our viewers, what would you suggest? What 2-3 things that you would recommend for us?
Well, I would narrow it down even to less than 2 or 3 to 1. See, the principal question we keep asking is, what use can science be, or what use can technology be for problems which I need to solve now? And that's something, of course, our science and technology enterprise must address. And it will address both by what it has and what it can scale. But if you want to go to the future, the one thing which we need to invest on in this data logic-driven world is teaching and training our population. 90% of our research goes to places where 10% of our students go. 90% of our students are not exposed to research. Therefore, creating structures, which we are doing, where research opportunities in mathematics, computer science, statistics, economics, history, biology, all of that is open to this 90%, will have a huge pool of talent which can deal with both known problems and unknown problems.
Well, Professor Vijay Raghavan, we've run out of time. I wish this conversation could go on, but the mission of the country does go on, and you have firm partners, sir. I know in the Nudge, they've been working with us for the past few months, and firm partners in us as a broadcasting platform. We do a lot on a weekly basis to figure out what ISRO is doing and what we can do on high tech. With that, it is a thanks, and back to Napina and Team Nudge to kick this off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Vijay Raghavan, for an enriching session. It's hard to believe that in 30 minutes we traversed such a wide array of themes, starting from industrial revolution to defense, space technologies, health, artificial intelligence. I think you've provoked us to think about these themes well beyond the session. Thank you, Mr. Gulati, for asking the questions that drew these very insightful responses across themes such as teaching, R&D, monetization of technologies, and achieving scale. Thank you both very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Rishabh. Thank you, Napina.
Good evening.
Take care, sir. Have a good evening.
Thank you.